On August 20th, Burkina Faso's government announced what it called a decisive victory in the town of Foutouri. According to official reports, 600 militants launched an attack at dawn. By the end of the day, more than 100 of them were declared dead, including 2 of their key leaders. State media credited President Captain Ibrahim Traoré for the success, calling it proof that his strategy is working. But here's the first problem. Almost every detail of this story depends on the government's version. 600 militants, 100 killed. Who verified those numbers? No independent source confirmed them, no international observers reported on the battle, and yet the figures spread instantly across social media, turning Traoré into a national hero overnight. And that raises the real question. Was this a Burkinabe victory or a Turkish one? The key factor wasn't a sudden transformation of Burkina Faso's army. It was the Bayraktar drones, imported from Ankara, that provided the intelligence and coordination. Without those drones, would the army have been able to repel such a large force? Or did technology made abroad deliver the result, while Traoré simply took the credit? This matters because Traoré built his political image on rejecting Western influence, on calling for sovereignty, on telling the world that Burkina Faso would no longer be dependent on outsiders. Yet the headline, Traoré defeats 600 militants, hides the fact that the tools of victory are foreign. Independence is the slogan, but dependency may be the reality. The more Traoré claims to fight for sovereignty, the more each battlefield victory exposes how much he still relies on foreign suppliers. In the next section, we will examine the technology itself, Bayraktar drones, armored vehicles, and what they reveal about who truly controls the balance of power in Burkina Faso. Everyone praises Traoré for the historic victory at Foutouri. But the more you dig, the clearer it becomes. The real hero of the story was not the president, not even the soldiers. It was Turkish-made drones. The Bayraktar TB2, produced by Bayraktar in Turkey, has already proven its effectiveness in several conflicts. It was a game-changer in Ukraine, where it helped repel Russian advances. It has been used in Libya, Syria, and even in Azerbaijan's war against Armenia. Each time the drone provided poorer countries or smaller armies with the ability to strike enemies much larger than themselves. Now Burkina Faso joins that list. These drones carry high-resolution cameras, can fly for more than 24 hours, and transmit live data directly to command centers. In Foutouri, that meant militants could be spotted miles away before they reached villages. Soldiers were guided into position with information no commander could have gathered just a few years ago. The result? A battle that looked less like a desperate defense and more like a planned ambush. But here's the contradiction. Burkina Faso does not own the factories that produce these drones. They don't control the spare parts, the software updates, or the supply chains. They are customers, nothing more. The same is true for the armored vehicles used on the ground, many of which come from Eastern Europe. For a president who loudly rejects Western domination, this is an uncomfortable truth. His victories depend on foreign technology and on contracts signed with Ankara and Moscow. And there's the cost. A single Bayraktar TB2 drone can range between $1 million and $5 million depending on the package. Maintenance, training, and weapons are additional expenses. For a country ranked among the poorest in the world, pouring tens of millions into imported technology raises serious questions. Where does the money come from? What public services are being cut to make these purchases possible? From an American perspective, this is where the alarm bells ring. In Washington, military analysts have a phrase, capability without sovereignty. It means that while a country can fight today, it cannot sustain itself tomorrow. If Turkey decides to raise prices, restrict spare parts, or shift alliances, Burkina Faso's drone fleet could be grounded overnight. The same goes for armored vehicles. Without domestic industry, sovereignty is only a slogan. So the story of Foutouri is not just about drones killing militants. It's about who really controls Burkina Faso's future. If foreign suppliers hold the keys, then every victory Traoré claims comes with a silent asterisk. Dependent on Ankara. What's your take? Do you see this as true independence, or just a new kind of dependency? If you agree with me, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. And that brings us to the next issue. Traoré's image. He's presented at home as a strong man, a savior of the nation. But outside Burkina Faso, the question is different. Is he really a leader, or just a showman riding on someone else's hardware? In Burkina Faso's state media, Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just a president, he's the savior of the nation. But the question that lingers is this: is he truly a strongman who restored security, or a showman carefully staging victories for political gain? Since coming to power in 2022, Traoré has positioned himself as the face of resistance against Western influence, especially France. He expelled French troops, ended defense agreements with Paris, and repeatedly declared that Burkina Faso would stand on its own. For many young Burkinabés, this defiance earned him the title of a hero. But critics point out that expelling one foreign power only to depend on others, Turkey for drones, Russia for training, and Eastern Europe for armored vehicles, is hardly a step toward sovereignty. It looks less like independence and more like shifting allegiances. Government announcements highlight every victory, from Foutouri to smaller operations in the Sahel. But here's what's missing from the narrative: independent verification. Casualty numbers, the identities of supposed militant leaders killed, even the scale of attacks. All of these details come directly from official statements. International observers, journalists, and watchdogs are rarely on the ground to confirm them. That gap allows the government to shape the story however it wants, portraying Traoré as the decisive commander whether or not the facts match. From the American perspective, this is a familiar pattern. Washington analysts have seen it before. Leaders in fragile states often amplify military wins to build political legitimacy. The logic is simple: if the people believe the army is winning, they will rally behind the government, even if daily life remains difficult. In that sense, propaganda can be as powerful as bullets. But let's ask a harder question. What happens when the propaganda outpaces reality? If citizens are promised security but continue to face sporadic attacks, how long before confidence erodes? If every battle is declared a turning point, how many turning points can there be before people realize the circle is repeating? These are the risks of relying too heavily on staged narratives. Traoré may appear as a strong man, but without transparency, his image risks collapsing into that of a showman, one who sells victories louder than he delivers them. And here's another angle. The more Traoré elevates his personal image, the more fragile the system becomes. If victories are tied to him alone, what happens the day he fails? Strong institutions survive leadership changes, personality cults do not. For the West, this is where skepticism grows. It is not enough to win a single battle. Stability requires systems, not slogans. What do you think? Has Traoré truly strengthened Burkina Faso, or is he just turning every drone strike into a PR campaign? If you agree with me, drop your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more discussions like this. Next, let's look at what matters most: the everyday reality for Burkinabé citizens. Do these victories actually change daily life in markets, schools, and villages, or are they just headlines that fade as quickly as they appear? The government says victories bring normal life back, but when you step outside the official narrative, the picture looks far less certain. Markets in towns like Foutouri did reopen after the August clashes. Farmers reported returning to their fields, and schools resumed classes that had been disrupted for months. These are not small gains. For people who lived under constant threat, even a few weeks of calm feels like a breakthrough. But here's the complication: peace is fragile and often temporary. A single attack can undo months of confidence. Let's look at the bigger numbers. Burkina Faso's defense budget jumped sharply after Traoré came to power. Official estimates suggest that over a third of national spending now goes to security. That's money diverted away from healthcare, infrastructure, and education. Yes, drones and armored vehicles may protect villages today, but what happens to the hospitals that lack medicine? What happens to the schools without teachers? From the American perspective, this is where the alarm rings the loudest. In Washington, debates over military spending dominate Congress precisely because every dollar on defense is a dollar not spent on citizens. In Burkina Faso, those checks and balances don't exist. The government claims security comes first, but the long-term trade-off may be deeper poverty, and poverty, ironically, is what drives recruitment into militant groups in the first place. So here's the paradox. The more Traoré spends on foreign technology to fight militants, the more conditions worsen that allow militants to recruit. Victories on the battlefield might be creating defeats at home. Now ask yourself, is the everyday reality truly improving, or is it just being marketed as improving? For every school that reopens, how many children still walk miles to fetch water? For every farmer who returns to his land, how many others remain displaced, relying on aid? These are the statistics that state media rarely mention. Do you believe the people of Burkina Faso are genuinely safer, or are they just spectators in a political performance? Share your view in the comments, and if you find this perspective important, hit like and subscribe. And this leads us to the regional picture. Because while Traoré celebrates victories at home, other African nations are watching closely. The question is, should they see Burkina Faso as a model or as a cautionary tale? Across Africa's Sahel, leaders are watching Traoré closely. Some call him a model, others quietly call him a warning. Since 2022, Burkina Faso has aligned itself with Mali and Niger, forming what's now branded the Alliance of Sahel States. All three have expelled French forces, all three reject Paris as a security partner, and all three insist they can chart a new course. On paper, that sounds like a powerful bloc. In practice, the picture is less convincing. Look at the facts. Niger, after its 2023 coup, leaned heavily on Russian private military trainers. Mali, under Colonel Assimi Goïta, bet on the Wagner Group to fill the gap left by French troops. Burkina Faso, for its part, has leaned on Turkish drones and, increasingly, Russian advisors. These choices share one theme. Every so-called independent government is still dependent, just on different suppliers. Burkina Faso's government portrays the Foutouri battle as evidence that the new strategy works. But let's put it in regional context. In Mali, militants remain active across large stretches of territory despite years of Russian involvement. In Niger, attacks have actually increased in some areas since foreign troops left. And in Burkina Faso, the United Nations estimates that nearly 2 million people are still internally displaced due to conflict. One decisive victory does not erase those numbers. From an American analyst's chair, this pattern looks familiar. During the Cold War, fragile states often became showcases for outside powers. One bloc supplied weapons, the other bloc supplied aid, and local leaders declared victory for independence. But independence built on imported weapons is fragile. The history of Angola in the 1970s or Afghanistan in the 1980s proves the point. Once the suppliers pull out, the so-called model collapses. This raises a question the Sahel bloc hasn't answered. If Turkey raises prices tomorrow, or if Russia shifts attention elsewhere, what happens? Do Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have the industrial base to sustain their militaries? Do they have the economies to pay for endless foreign contracts? Right now, the answer appears to be no. By framing themselves as models, these governments risk exporting false hope. Other African countries, Chad, Guinea, even parts of Nigeria, are watching. They see images of drones defeating militants, soldiers raising flags, villages cheering. What they don't see are the budget deficits, the displaced populations, and the quiet dependency deals signed behind closed doors. So I'll ask you directly, if you were advising an African government today, would you recommend following Traoré's playbook? Or would you warn them that what looks like a victory today could become a trap tomorrow? Comment your view below, and if you value this kind of analysis, remember to like and share. From Washington's perspective, the worry is simple. Instability spreads. If Burkina Faso fails, it won't just be a domestic problem. It will ripple across borders, feeding militant networks that already stretch from Mali to Nigeria. That's why U.S. officials describe the Sahel as a contagion zone. One country's false model can infect the whole region, which brings us back to numbers. Because if leaders want to sell their story, nothing works better than statistics. 600 militants, 100 dead. But how much of this is data, and how much is theater? That's where we turn next. 600 militants, 100 dead, 2 leaders eliminated. On paper, it looks like a clean equation. But in war, numbers are never that simple, and often they're not even real. Governments know this. In every conflict, casualty figures are more than statistics. They are weapons in the information war. The United States learned this in Iraq and Afghanistan, where official numbers often painted battles as decisive wins, only for insurgents to regroup days later. The Soviet Union did the same in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Even in modern Syria, both Assad's regime and opposition groups inflated or deflated numbers to prove momentum. In every case, numbers were used not to describe reality, but to create perception. So when Burkina Faso's government says 600 militants attacked and 100 were killed, the first question should be, verified by whom? Neutral observers? Independent journalists? Or simply state television quoting military spokesmen? With international media largely absent from the front lines in the Sahel, the government faces little scrutiny. That vacuum allows it to shape the story however it wants. Here's why this matters. If the number of attackers is exaggerated, then the scale of the victory is inflated. Imagine if the real number was closer to 200, not 600. Suddenly the ratio of militants killed, weapons seized, and leaders eliminated looks very different. And if casualty figures are overstated, the supposed decisive blow might be far less decisive than claimed. From the American perspective, this pattern is troubling. In Washington, intelligence agencies rely on multiple sources: satellite imagery, independent reports, NGO accounts, before treating battlefield claims as fact. In Burkina Faso, where access is restricted and outside journalists are often unwelcome, the international community is left to rely on official statements. That makes it almost impossible to separate truth from propaganda. Let's also consider the motivations. For Traoré, the higher the numbers, the stronger his image. A victory against 600 militants sounds like national salvation. A victory against 200 sounds routine. Numbers inflate reputation, and reputation strengthens his grip on power. For foreign suppliers like Turkey or Russia, inflated numbers prove the effectiveness of their weapons, making Burkina Faso a live advertisement for their defense industries. Everyone benefits, except the truth. Inflated numbers don't just mislead the public, they also distort strategy. If commanders believe they've eliminated 100 militants, they may underestimate how many fighters remain in the field. That false confidence can leave villages vulnerable to new attacks. In other words, propaganda can cost lives. What's your view? Do you believe the numbers coming out of Burkina Faso, or do you think they're theater for public consumption? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more fact-driven analysis, hit like and subscribe. Now, let's add some hard context. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, ACLED, militant violence in Burkina Faso has continued to rise sharply since 2019. Despite government claims of victories, over 6,000 civilians were reported killed in 2023 alone. If the army is truly killing hundreds of militants at a time, why is civilian death toll still climbing? The numbers don't align, and that gap should alarm anyone paying attention. From a Western lens, this is the contradiction that undermines Traoré's narrative. It's not that his forces never win battles, it's that the broader trend, displacement, civilian casualties, militant activity, shows little sign of improvement. Numbers cherry-picked for headlines may inspire patriotic pride, but they don't change the overall trajectory. Which brings us to the bigger issue, sustainability. Because even if every number is true, even if 600 militants were defeated, the question remains, can Burkina Faso keep winning tomorrow? Or are these victories temporary, while the deeper problems continue to grow? That's what we examine next. One battle can win headlines, but wars are not won in a single morning. The question is, can Burkina Faso sustain these victories, or are they burning fuel faster than they can replace it? The victory in Foutouri has been described as a turning point. Yet militant violence across Burkina Faso continues. According to UN data, over 2 million people remain displaced as of mid-2025, and militant groups still control or influence wide stretches of the Sahel. Winning one clash does not mean winning the war. In fact, history shows that insurgencies rarely collapse after a single defeat. They regroup, adapt, and strike again, often with new tactics. Burkina Faso's army faces the same dilemma others have faced before. In Iraq, U.S. forces cleared cities of insurgents, only to see them return months later. In Afghanistan, the Taliban absorbed battlefield losses year after year, until NATO forces withdrew. Even Nigeria's fight against Boko Haram shows the same pattern: victories in battles followed by years of lingering insurgency. Sustainability is not about one win, it's about whether the state can hold territory, maintain logistics, and keep its citizens safe consistently. Now consider the resources. Maintaining a fleet of Bayraktar drones is costly. Each drone requires spare parts, software updates, trained operators, and secure facilities. These are not one-time purchases, they are recurring expenses. For a nation where GDP per capita is under $1,000, sustaining millions of dollars in defense technology contracts is a long-term burden. Already, analysts estimate that nearly 40% of Burkina Faso's budget now goes to security, a figure that crowds out health, education, and infrastructure. From a U.S. perspective, this is the definition of fragility. American analysts call it the trap of unsustainable modernization. It means a country buys advanced tools it cannot afford to maintain, leaving it weaker in the long run. If Turkey or Russia cut support tomorrow, how many of these systems would still operate in a year? And if budgets collapse, does the government sacrifice defense or basic services? Either way, the strain undermines long-term stability. What do you think? Should poor nations prioritize short-term military strength, even if it risks long-term collapse? Share your take in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you value deeper analysis. Another dimension is manpower. Burkina Faso's army is relatively small, and many recruits lack advanced training. Technology can multiply strength, but without continuous training programs, those advantages fade. Reports from the Sahel show that militants are already adjusting. Some groups avoid large formations that drones can easily target, instead splitting into smaller, faster units. Others are experimenting with counter-drone tactics, including camouflage and electronic jamming. If militants adapt faster than the military can retrain, victories will be short-lived. There's also the political cost. Traoré has tied his legitimacy to constant military success. Every victory boosts his image. Every setback threatens it. That is not a sustainable foundation for governance. Strong institutions can survive defeats. Personality-based regimes cannot. From Washington's perspective, this is the danger. Burkina Faso's stability depends less on structural reforms and more on whether Traoré can keep producing victories. That is a fragile model. Consider again Afghanistan. The Afghan National Army, heavily funded and trained by the U.S., won battles for years, but collapsed almost overnight once external support was withdrawn. Why? Because sustainability was never built into the system. The same warning applies here. If victories rely on foreign hardware and inflated propaganda, they may crumble under pressure. And that leads to the final question. What does this mean not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole? Is Traoré offering the continent a roadmap, or is he simply selling a story that cannot last? That's where we turn next. Foutouri is not just a battle in Burkina Faso, it is a mirror reflecting the contradictions of a whole region, and maybe the whole continent. Let's step back. Traoré's government calls this a national triumph. But when we trace the details, the story is complicated. The drones that made the difference were Turkish. The armored vehicles on the ground came from Eastern Europe. The training and intelligence support leaned on foreign partners. The victory is real, but it is not entirely Burkinabe. Across Africa, other nations are watching. Mali, Niger, Chad, Guinea, all face similar threats. Leaders are tempted to follow Traoré's path, expel the West, buy weapons from elsewhere, declare sovereignty. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Changing your supplier is not the same as gaining independence. If your victories depend on someone else's factories, then your sovereignty is conditional. From Washington's perspective, this is déjà vu. America has seen fragile states celebrate turning points again and again, only to fall back into crisis. Afghanistan after 2001, Iraq after 2003, even Vietnam in the 1960s. Each time leaders promised that victories on the battlefield would deliver lasting stability. Each time the deeper problems, poverty, governance, institutions proved stronger than military wins. The lesson is simple. You cannot outsource your way to independence. Here's the irony. The louder Traoré speaks of sovereignty, the clearer it becomes how much he depends on foreign suppliers. The bigger the number of militants killed, the more obvious the reliance on foreign hardware. The more he markets victories, the more he exposes the gap between rhetoric and reality. And that's where I put the question directly to you. Do you honestly believe Traoré is building true independence? Or is he just borrowing victories and selling them as his own? If you think this is sovereignty, say it in the comments. If you think it's dependency wrapped in a new flag, call it out. Don't just watch, engage. Like this video, share it, and subscribe if you want the uncomfortable truths no one else will say out loud. Because this isn't just about Burkina Faso. This is about whether African nations will keep repeating the same cycle, trading one foreign partner for another, while calling it liberation. This is about whether the next generation will inherit real sovereignty, or just more propaganda. And it's about whether the world will keep applauding symbolic victories, while the underlying problems remain unsolved. Foutouri was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a debate that Africa cannot avoid. Victory or dependency, sovereignty or substitution. The choice belongs not just to Traoré, but to the people and to history.